this evening. A beautiful thanks to Amy Landau for inviting us to speak here tonight, to Hannah Wu for helping us this evening, for all the staff at the Fowler for supporting this, and for the co-sponsors, all the organizations and departments. It's such a blessing to be here. Thank you for joining us. And a special thanks tonight to my friend Benjamin Kersten for being in conversation. I am the tzadik. Julie Weitz, the artist, also known as Jules, has invited me to speak on her behalf because she thinks that to represent a performance art practice inspired by Yiddish folklore, you must fully embody it. So here I am, Amy, and I'm very excited to talk with you all tonight. A question: may I offer us a little blessing before we begin?
Avada, of course.
Good. All right, I have these hands that Jules has designed for a performance that she's giving in Krakow this summer. You may recognize them. A little blessing for our learning tonight. May we expand our consciousness. May we open our hearts to new ideas, integrating the past with the present to offer new visions for the future. Doikayt, Doikayt, Hereness, Hereness. Doikayt, Doikayt, Hereness, Hereness.
Okay.
You can see I'm excited.
I can see that.
Let me just get a few things here. My book. All right.
Well, I am also very excited. I think many of us are excited to learn more about you, where you come from. So maybe why don't we start? Can you tell us a little bit more about that blessing?
Those hands, you might recognize them as the Vulcan salute from Mr. Spock. Mr. Spock did not originate it. It is the Kohanim blessing, although I'm not a Kohen. I'm actually a Levite, and to be honest, I'm a woman disguised as a man, so in certain contexts I wouldn't be able to give that blessing.
Okay. Well, why don't we visit some of those contexts? Do you want to take us?
Oh yes, I've got this little clicker. There we go.
Okay, well, I'm not sure this is exactly giving us the most traditional understanding of Hasidism. So we can back up a little bit. Folks might be taken aback, for instance, to see the Sephirot, or the luminous emanations, the ways that the infinite God manifests in this world, reimagined as what I can only describe as a Versace-esque bodysuit.
Ooh, Versace.
But why don't we back up a little bit further and think about Hasidism a little more broadly. So this is a spiritual revival movement that emerged in Eastern Europe in the 18th century. Now, much of its teachings can be found in Kabbalistic thought from much earlier, and Kabbalah describes a set of esoteric teachings that explain the relationship of an infinite God to a finite world. Hasidism spread rapidly, much to the chagrin of Maskilim, or proponents of the Jewish Enlightenment, who advocated for the reform of Jewish life through education as a way to ease discrimination. But interestingly, Hasidim have kind of become signifiers in their own right, I think we can say. They've sort of become ways to represent an authentic Jewish spirituality.
Authentic Jewish spirituality. My, Dr. Kersten, your knowledge is very impressive.
I'm not a doctor.
You're being modest, yeah, shy. I'm sure your mother wishes you were.
It's true. Maybe not this kind, but we'll see. So why don't you say a little bit more about Hasidism?
Yes, well, Jules has been interested in Hasidism for a very long time. She's been Hasidut curious, I like to say. She first learned about Kabbalah in high school. She was raised traditional in the conservative movement, and And then in college, she studied a little of the Baal Shem Tov. She got a little connected to Chabad. And she likes to tell this story. Many years ago, when she was around 20 years old, she was in Sfat, a very mystical city. And she was being hosted on Shabbos by an ultra-Orthodox family. And the time came after the meal to sing Birkat Hamazon, the prayer for the blessing over the food. It's a beautiful Shabbos tune, something like Shir HaMaloch V'Shuv Adonai. And suddenly, the man of the house pointed at her and said, "Stop!" She was utterly humiliated. She thought, my voice is so bad, this man can't stand to hear it. No, her voice was so seductive that he wanted to stoop her in the back room. So it was in this moment she realized that this thing of Hasidism, she was so interested in the thought and the legends, but the way that it was practiced in Orthodoxy was not for her. And she left, but stayed a student of Kabbalah, Hasidism, and really through her art practice, she's found her own way to claim it. And you can see it in this psychedelic tzadik character. It's a sexier version of me, to be honest. Yes, well then she, when she started performing, she started first as the golem, and she became a great dominatrix. And this, of course, is a little, another sexy version of the Hasidic drag, she liked to call it. And there's a relationship, I think, between Hasidism and BDSM, and I actually hear those communities are somewhat connected.
Well, here I think we see quite a connection. I think we see BDSM being used to skewer the idea of Jewish global domination.
Right, Jews control the world. At least this one controlled, or tried to control, an inflatable globe.
She does seem like she's having a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, she's trying her best.
But this also introduces us to the golem figure.
Yes.
And the golem is an anthropomorphic figure made out of clay or mud. The most famous narrative tells how the Maharal, a rabbi in 16th century Prague, animated a golem to protect the Jews of Prague from pogroms or anti-Jewish riots. Now, the golem has also been taken up as something of a symbol. I think we can say the golem often operates as a symbol of resistance to Christian supremacy and state violence. And that actually takes me back to my first encounter with Jules's golem. And this is quite true. This is how Jules and I met. We were at a protest.
Yes, the golem remembers quite well. This was in fact the first time that she came out in public. She had only presented herself on the screen. She originated on Instagram. And really what happened is Jules had been thinking about the golem metaphor for quite a long time, and then the Unite the Right rally happened in Charlottesville, where those really stupid men were shouting, "Jews will not replace us," and other racist slurs. And she thought, oh, I need to make a golem to get revenge on these assholes. And so she created a golem, and this was, yes, the first time she came out. She really saw the golem as a justice seeker and started attending these protests for immigrants' rights. In fact, this one was at the Adelanto Detention Center. And she really understood that as a third-generation American, she had a relationship to the immigrant experience, and also having had her great-grandparents flee these places in Eastern Europe because of state-sponsored violence, as you mentioned. And so this is what the golem really became. Incidentally, Jules embraced the metaphor of the golem, which is very much like AI, where the golem supersedes their creator's control, growing exponentially, and she allowed the character to grow and really veer towards whoever wanted her somewhere, and also what she was called to do in terms of justice work. So it was immigrants' rights protests. Later on, she becomes a wildland firefighter. Many iterations of this project.
So it seems the golem very much wants to be in this world. I mean, the golem seems to be a way to explore politics, what it means to be a political being, and I think questions around animation and what it means to be human are very much a part of that.
And what it means to be Jewish.
And what it means to be Jewish. And I think we had maybe similar trajectories. I was thinking about white nationalism and antisemitism, and it was some of those commitments to social justice that brought me out to a protest where I met the golem. But I was very surprised and taken aback to see this figure declaring itself to be a golem at the Amazon bookstore in Century City, at a protest demanding Amazon cut ties with immigrations and customs enforcement. And it raises this question of what it means to be confronted by a figure out of Jewish and Yiddish folklore. It seems to be raising the question of how these worlds past, or worlds of an imagined past, a past located in Eastern Europe, how those speak to our world today. And in fact, that reminds me of early ethnographic efforts.
Look at those. Here we are.
Sure. So these early ethnographic efforts to research Yiddish-speaking Jews, and the ways that those efforts were really part of an impulse and a desire to record worlds that were understood to be vanishing.
Vanishing? What do you mean vanishing?
Well, Jewish life in the 19th century underwent a complete upheaval due to industrialization, urbanization, migration. This took place over a period marked by pogroms, world wars, eventually the all but total destruction of Jewish life in Europe. Like European anthropologists and ethnographers, Jewish ethnographers felt they needed to access this authentic world and document these ways of life before they vanished.
And they documented them as types. I'm not so sure how I feel about that. Like, what would the ethnographers have to say about me?
Well, I think you raise a good point. I'm not quite sure they would know what to make of you. So here we're looking at photographs that were taken by Solomon Yudovin on the expeditions Indeed. On the expeditions that Shloime Zalman Rappaport, or S.Y. Ansky, led over 3 consecutive summers from 1912 to 1914. And I think we can look at these photographs as starting to establish a visual vocabulary for this idea of traditional Jewish life. And so on these expeditions, Ansky, or Rappaport, aimed to use materials that he collected, ritual objects, photographs, folklore, as the source materials for the first comprehensive ethnographic study of Russian Jewry. And the aim of this was to make possible new forms of Jewish identity, to mitigate the effects of assimilation, to build a new secular Jewish culture.
So it was a little like anti-assimilationist work, or maybe decolonial work even.
I think you could say that. But I do think you raise an interesting tension around this dynamic of types and what that does to people.
Yeah, I'm not so sure I'm comfortable with this kind of framing, but I see the value of it given what happened to European Jewry. Jules, I think, in a sense, is going back to rediscover what's been lost as part of her project and kind of resurrecting these Yiddish myths like the tzadik, like the dybbuk. And here we have a few slides about the dybbuk, which I would love to hear, Dr. Kersten, what you have to say about Ansky's move from ethnography to playwriting.
To playwriting and to storytelling. I think that's a great thing to raise, and I think it's something that Jules is really interested in interrogating as well. So Ansky's idea of a new secular Jewish culture. His nationalism was meant to be based on Yiddish language and Yiddish culture. So he integrated his research into stories like der Dybbuk.
Der dibbuk.
Yes,
I know
precisely.
this one very well.
And it's quite interesting that he incorporated his research into theater and used that as a way to spread these ideas and findings about Jewish folklore. So the dybbuk is this story of spirit possession that takes place just as a woman is about to enter an arranged marriage. The play was performed in multiple languages and formats. It led to adaptations by Aaron Copland, George Gershwin, Tony Kushner.
I think you can add Julie Weitz to that list.
Indeed. And as we move from, say, the genre of ethnography to these works of theater, we're confronting what Samuel Spinner has described as an aesthetic mode of Jewish primitivism. So
Wait. Jewish primitivism.
Jewish primitivism.
Wait. Primitivism? This sounds offensive. Professor, please explain more.
Oh, well, I think you feel free to take offense.
Am I right?
Because-
Jewish primitivism? What does that stir up in your mind?
Yeah, this is the idea of Jews portraying other Jews as savages. And Spinner analyzes this in the context of works of European Jewish culture. So travel writing, theater, literature, figures heavily. And he analyzes this aesthetic mode as something that came out of the effort to create and consolidate identity and nationhood in Jewish culture.
So it's a time of rising nationalism and imperialism in Europe, and from what I'm understanding, it's like Jews looking at other Jews, kind of a subject-object relationship, as they might say.
That's exactly right, and I think you raised the point about rising nationalisms, and I think there are certain ways of thinking that we can understand as having contributed to the social and political formation of nation states, including the idea of evolutionary progress, in which peoples, nations, individuals are assigned particular places and moments within that paradigm. And that's part of what lays the groundwork for binaries like civilized and savage that becomes so crucial to many European nationalisms.
Such ugly terms.
Ugly terms.
Civilized, savage. Again, this categorization, it makes me a little uncomfortable, Mr. Kersten.
Well, of course, we're not dealing with you per se. We're maybe an idea of
An idea of me?
you.
An idea of me? Have the Jew not eyes? Have the Jew not affections, organs?
Well, let's back up before we get I get myself into hot water here. So primitivism describes this idea of looking to peoples and objects that you understand to be at a geographic and temporal remove from your own. And many artists engaged in this as a way of looking for the attributes of authenticity, or often to inform critiques.
Ooh, like I'm an authentic Jew somehow.
Exactly. And it was also meant to inform a critique of industrialized, urbanized societies in many cases. So the way Spinner discusses this mode of Jewish primitivism is in part as a method of figuring out this problem of Jewish identity in relation to European nationalisms.
And also becoming more secular, as they say. They lose the ruach, the spirit of being Jewish. It's a certain kind of Yiddishkeit that's secular, am I right?
Yes, although I think there's more digging and ways for us to think about the term secular and its relationship to spirituality. Some might say that secularism doesn't describe, say, the idea of subtracting the spirit and leaving a world that can be known through rational science, but a different sort of engagement with the spiritual.
Okay, I'm going to think on that. I wanted to bring a little bit of Jules's work back into the picture.
Wonderful.
As you're doing this beautiful framing. I very much appreciate it, Dr. Kersten. I'm sort of beginning to understand this idea of a Jewish artist looking to the past to reframe or reconstruct an image of the past, thinking about Jewish identity. I know that Jules, as she started performing as these Yiddish folklore characters, she really had to work through her own internalized anti-Semitism. Because the truth is, we live in a very Christian society surrounded by white supremacy. So even though Jules had real naches, real pride for growing up Jewish in a very Jewish family and Jewish community, she always felt a little bit ashamed. I mean, it's like, I'm so Jewish, it's embarrassing. And what is that shame? It's real, and I think in a way, by performing it, Jules is releasing it. Is that possible?
I think that could very much be possible. But I think maybe some of Jules's work can also help us bring a new approach to these questions of authenticity, of forms of nationalism and cultural nationalism, of Yiddishkeit.
Yes, to authentically identify herself as a Jew, she had to be over the top in her disguise.
Certainly. Well, I think maybe we can think about different modes of performance and theater then.
To that end, oh, fantastisch, this image, I love this image. This is the Vilna troupe performing the dibbuk in Paris. And I know you were telling me earlier that the dibbuk really was worldwide in terms of its reach, that they reached stages even in Paris, but all over the world. Am I right? Something like that?
Yes, you are correct. So this is being performed by the Vilna troupe, which formed in 1915 in the city of Vilna, after Germans occupied the city and lifted Tsarist restrictions on staging Yiddish theater. But it was this production of the dibbuk, which they premiered in 1920, that really helped the Vilna troupe find success beyond the Jewish intelligentsia. And it's quite interesting that this becomes the representative work of Yiddish theater, this production suffused with nostalgia, with a romanticized image of the Jewish past. But interestingly, and maybe Jules can comment on this, the Vilna troupe had some of its roots in a tradition of amateur Yiddish theatrics.
Oh, yes, the amateur Yiddish theatrics that really its lineage came from Purim spiels, which is the holiday where we all dress up and then we perform for each other, which Jules really grew up doing. In fact, she comes from a family of amateur performers, just like myself, absolutely no training. Here is a family portrait. Her grandfather's in the center with the hanger and mustache hanging from his neck. And these were first-generation Americans or immigrants who came from Belarus. And this is actually the Chaim Yuda's Cousins Club. It's my family's Cousins Club, excuse me. I like to believe I'm a part of it. It's Jules' family Cousins Club, and we still meet. They still meet regularly for holidays, and back in the day, they performed for one another. And really, it's a little fagula, if you ask me. There's a lot of men dressed as women, a lot of drag happening. The funny thing is, they just performed for each other. So there was something about the cultural experience of performance that was just so natural to the way they were. Here's another one. My grandfather, Jules' grandfather, is squeezing her great uncle's titty. Just another day in the Chaim Yuda's family. In fact, Jules grew up seeing these performances, and there was a little generational parody, is how she likes to call it, where the younger generation would perform the certain acts of the older generation, like, Uncle Harold always did the striptease, so his son then did the striptease. There was a certain order of which act you could get. Incidentally, one of these family members did become famous late in her age. My great aunt, her great aunt, Clara Pella, she said, "Where's the beef?" In the Wendy's commercial. She was not a trained actress. She was just a funny old Jewish woman. And she got recruited from this director, and she ended up becoming very famous. I mean, you all know Where's the Beef as a statement. She made a whole career of it. She really became a bit of a caricature with her pearls and her wig and her little collar. And Jules grew up with her. She was a very spirited character. She came from Belarus when she was about 11 years old, and she was just full of life, which clearly the director picked up on and employed her in this role.
I think this idea of caricature could really be useful in helping us think about these issues of geographical, cultural, linguistic proximity or distance, as the case may be. And I think this is something that arises especially, or that maybe becomes thrown into relief when we're thinking about genealogies and family histories.
Yes, where do you come from? What is your lineage? These are certainly questions that Jules is asking, and specifically, when she started this project, she was asking what's her performance lineage, and this is what she ended up with.
But also, I think these are questions that are animating current developments in Yiddish culture.
This is true. Tell me more.
Sure. So this image is here to represent the Yiddish Land Pavilion, which was organized by Yevgeny Feeks and curator Maria Weitz as an intervention in the 2022 Venice Biennale. So this took place as a series of hybrid online, offline events, performances, some of which were designed as interventions into the built national pavilions in Venice. And the Yiddish Land Pavilion, the organizers, stated that part of their aim in doing this, in interrogating Yiddish and Jewish discourses in contemporary art, was to make possible new forms of Jewish identity in diaspora. And so I think part of what we can think about is how that relates to this earlier history, the history that we raised with Ansky and ethnography, this goal of using Yiddish language and culture to build out make new forms of Jewish identity possible. Only now, of course, I think we can raise new questions again about authenticity and nationalism, the dynamics of Hereness and theirness. And so I'm very inspired by the idea of, say, taking figures who might have entered a cultural lexicon earlier and making them speak otherwise.
Like I'm speaking otherwise.
Yes, like you are speaking otherwise. I'm wondering if it's possible to, say, think through the dybbuk as a form of embodiment and desire that gives us insight into some other possibilities outside of a heteronormative Christian society. And if there's a way to engage in this type of imagination without falling into naive optimism or exoticism.
Very interesting. I think this also brings up these questions that Jules asks in her practice. Am I the self or other? Am I the dibbuk? Am I the golem? Am I the artist? Am I Jules? Am I a tzadik? All of these questions, they really kind of get down to this deeper question around what it means to be a Jew now, in this society, and perhaps elsewhere.
Indeed. So I think, why don't we take another look at the dybbuk?
The dybbuk, yes. Well, we do have a very beautiful clip, if you haven't seen this before. It's a 1937 film made in Poland. We'll just show you this little clip of this beautiful dance sequence.
Piękna Mensch, ist ja Freudentanz gegeben.
Jewish choreographer and dancer. You know, Jules, recently, last summer, she went to Poland and she actually went to the town where this was filmed, Kazimierz Dolny. It was a little bit of a strange situation because she went to the town and it happened that day. There was a Polish folk music festival and the only little Jewish institution in town was being used by the Polish singers to rehearse. So she couldn't quite get into that site, but she's very curious to go back to this town and investigate the memory of Jewish life there and maybe even restage a scene from the dibbuk. Do you know she got a Fulbright? Yes, so she is going back, and last summer she did her initial research, including going back to the ancestral towns where her great-grandparents are from, the towns that she could get to. Not every country is open to people going back. In this case, she goes back with this wonderful activist, Tomek, and she's in the Polish forest looking for the gravestones of a great-grandparent's family. I'll just show you this little clip. You think these are just stones, but they're gravestones. Oh my God. There's a grave right here. Everything is overgrown because very few people are left to take care of these.
Look at this one, a tree just fell right down on it.
Strangely, the cemetery becomes a testament to Jewish life that once existed there. Someone had already been there and put the rocks on this stone. So beautiful. And here, Tomek taught Jules this little trick of how to read a stone that looks like just a stone. A stone is not a stone.
Vatikirs Lamed Shin Yidshua.
It's very difficult to read.
Wow.
So Jules has this vision where she's going to go as the dibbuk. She really feels like the dibbuk is possessing her. She's being possessed to go back to these lands to properly mourn her ancestors. So before she went on that trip, she filmed this sequence with her dibbuk, and she has this scroll attached to the dress that is written upon it is the mourner's Kaddish, the prayer for the dead. And she's thinking this idea, what does it mean to lay a text down across these lands where either her family's buried or she also went to the town in Scordville, Lithuania, where her great-grandmother is from. What would it mean to have the dibbuk walk across the mass burial where all of the Jews of that community were killed who did not leave before World War II? Here she's in the Angeles National Forest on Tongva land in a burnt forest, which she had filmed in the burnt forest before with her golem. So she was very much thinking about death and destruction over a landscape. And also, what does it mean to honor those deaths, those lives, and show a kind of reverence for what was?
And I think some of what that process of rehearsal and then this future performance is helping us think about is the ways that sites give meaning to performance, or the ways that embodiment and performance can activate different aspects of a site or ideas of place. And so this is, of course, something that's been associated with Yiddish culture and a form of diasporism called Doikayt.
Doikayt.
Yes, so we've been talking about ideas of Jewish peoplehood and visions for Jewish life that really emerged from the late 19th century and took root in the early 20th century. And we can think about, say, the year 1897 as symbolic of the way that many options were on the table. So in the year 1897, for instance, the World Zionist Organization was founded in Basel, but also the General Union of Jewish Workers in Lithuania, Poland, and Russia, also known as the Bund, was founded in...
Bund, I just love that word, the Bund.
The Bund was founded in Vilna. And the leaders of this movement were interested in attracting Eastern European Jews to the emergent Russian revolutionary movement.
Ah, Jewish revolutionaries. We know much about this.
And the use of Yiddish became integral to create a mass movement. The Bundists embraced the idea that Jews existed, or lived here, or there, in diaspora. And the term Doikayt was used to express this idea of Hereness. It was used by Bundists, Yiddishists, diaspora nationalists to stress the idea of native roots and to express objection sometimes to the idea that Jews had to go there to seek out territorial sovereignty. Of course,
diaspora nationalists, can you explain that term?
Sure. So diaspora nationalists, that idea finds its articulation in the writings of a historian named Shimon Dubnov. And this idea of diaspora nationalism, which he developed over the course of the 1890s and also started publishing works on in 1897, that year again, is the idea he understood Jews to be a nation and was invested in the continuance of this nation in the lands of their dispersion.
Right. No need for claiming any land. Wherever we are, here we are as Jews, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
It gets a little complicated.
Yes, I like to simplify.
There's many
things,
debates
Dr.
with
Kersten. Can I show you this image, which you are in, incidentally?
Oh.
Some other people this evening might be in here. This is Jules' little project. She's calling her project Doikayt. Doikayt has many meanings as you're giving the history of it. You see these Doikayt shirts. She's actually made some Doikayt merch. She'd be kind of embarrassed that I'm going to peddle this right now. But just so you know, these beautiful Doikayt tank tops and t-shirts have been made. And after this talk, you can get some if you'd like.
I'm not sure we have time for peddling right now, although I do hear that the proceeds from the sales will support Jules's travel to Eastern Europe this summer.
Yes, support the filming of her performances.
Yes. But we might also think about other ways that Doikayt has been picked up. So it was kind of reclaimed by the activist and writer Melanie K. Kantrowitz, who used this as an organizing principle for Jews who were fighting against racism and economic injustices.
Yes, I think that's when Jules first came in contact with the word Doikayt, when she was organizing with other progressive Jews around anti-racist and anti-fascist causes, and she heard this term, Doikayt.
But I do think that Jules is raising something new about Doikayt for us to explore. I mean, so even though it refers to this idea of Hereness, in the way we're using it also seems to express a there-ness. They're referring to Eastern Europe.
Eastern Europe, her going back there. Well, she's was interested in the resonance of this term Doikayt, both historically, as you mentioned, and in the contemporary activism, but also Doikayt is this idea, Hereness, for her performance art practice. That she's developed a practice that is very much in tune with her local surroundings and a kind of sensory awareness of what's happening, whether it's in the burnt forest or at a protest. And in this case, she's very interested in going back to the lands where her ancestors are from and restaging these Yiddish folklore characters in a very contemporary way. There's certainly a level of queerness that she's bringing to it. And her first series of performances are going to be in 2 weeks, very soon. I have to get ready for this. She's performing at the Jewish Cultural Festival in Krakow, being hosted by the Galicia Museum, and she is going to be performing The Seven Beggars, a very beautiful Rebbe Nachman tale. Rebbe Nachman is the great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov who founded Hasidism. And this tale, do you mind if I give a little spiel on the tale?
By all means.
All right, so the tale, very short version, because it's a long and convoluted story within a story, very Jewish in this way. Basically, two kids are lost in a forest, and each day a beggar visits them and helps them survive the forest. They grow up, they leave the forest, and they get married, and at the wedding celebration, they wish that each of the beggars would come and visit. Alas, each of the beggars visits, and the beggars have a perceived ailment. There's a blind beggar, a deaf beggar, a beggar with withered hands, but it turns out what is perceived as a disability is really a blessing. And so she's developed these performances with a crew of other diasporic Ashkenazi Jews. This is them rehearsing in Brooklyn a few months ago. They were all fellows at Yiddishkeit, who is also co-sponsoring this event. And they're going to be staging street performances, very clown-inspired. This is the costume for the blind beggar, for example. They're going to have, you see here, this is a huge chuppah that Jules has designed with the help of Jill Spector, who is in the audience today. And they're going to lead a procession in one of the performances. There's many parts to this performances. There's also a lot of ephemera that's being created. So Jules is also having an exhibition. You see she's got a stack of these hands. So these foam hand mitts she's going to be handing out to local people, and they're going to be leading folks in chants and a whole performance around hands. This is the beggar with the withered hands. It turns out his hands are very much healing hands. And here we have, again, the Sephirot diagram. This is the costume for the hunchback beggar. Very much, there's a mythology around the tree with the hunchback. A tree is growing out of his back, and the tree is also referencing the tree of life diagram. So there's many parts to this project, and this is just the beginning of her Doikayt series, where she will be staging different performances at different Jewish sites or different sites in Poland.
Well, that sounds really wonderful, and I
Exciting.
know we'll all eagerly follow.
Yeah.
And we'll be interested to hear how it develops.
Yes, and there's an interesting context in Poland because there is a kind of affection, admiration for Jewish culture. It's maybe not known that before the war, 1 in 10 Poles were Jewish. So 10% of Poland was Jewish. That's a very large percentage of Jews of any given country. So there is a kind of, you might call it like a Jewish phantom limb that is felt. Of course, that's not to negate that there's also antisemitism in these lands, and there's certainly a lot of trauma. But Jules is interested in reanimating Yiddish folklore to kind of, as a reparative gesture, you might say. So that it's not just a focus on Poland as a land and site of Jewish death, but also Jewish life.
Well, I do also want to make sure that we give some of our audience some time to ask you, the
You're
tzaddik,
watching the clock.
or yes.
What time is it right now?
It is 6:52.
Oh, so we don't have much time. Can I just show the golem as one last character?
That's maybe up to them, seeing as golem does translate to the crowd is stupid.
The crowd is a fool.
The masses
Are
are
you a fool?
asses.
This is another potential performance of a character Jules is developing, and this golem is based on Der Golem, the German expressionist film. She's thinking, how do you embody the crowd is a fool? This is her version, of course. Yes. All right, let's make time for questions. And also, I think that I will transform back into the artist known as Jules as we open it up to the audience. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Benjamin, for facilitating these
Thank you.
wonderful conversations. All right. Any questions? We'd love to chat with y'all, schmooze a little.
Maybe while they're thinking, do you want to talk about your outfit?
Yes, well, Jill Spector is here. I can't see her, but she's in the audience. She helped me design this. And, you know, we also do this project, Tzitzi project together, where we've been designing tzitzi for women, queer, and trans and non-binary Jews. And it turned out that someone caught wind of it and sent us two huge boxes of old tzadik that were just being stored as like old Judaica that people don't use anymore. So we are now using it in the costumes, in the quilt that I showed you. So it feels like a real sacred repurposing of these garments. Any questions? Yeah.
I'm just, it's very interesting what you're doing. I'm wondering how you are, is this a new thing that you're doing, and where you're performing it, and if you're connecting with theater companies or?
Yeah, great questions. Well, the golem character started in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
The images that we showed earlier started then. The tzadik character is relatively new, and then this whole project of Doikayt is new, bringing it to Eastern Europe. And curiously, the work has gotten more theatrical, but to be honest, like I really identify more as an artist. And so I'm not really thinking of it as a company or theater production. It's much more performance art mixed in with a lot of clowning. Yeah, but of course Yiddish theater is so much in inspiration right now. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you speak Yiddish?
Ich rede ein bisschen Yiddish. One of my Yiddish teachers is in the crowd right now. There I see Zach and Claire. So as a fellow at Yiddishkeit, I started studying it. And I keep wanting to learn more because it's been a fascinating process. I mean, just to realize that the way my family talks is like some kind of iteration of Yiddish, but in English. Like even saying like, you know, what's doing? Vos machst du? I mean, that's how my mom will answer the phone, what's doing? That's very much a direct translation of Yiddish.
But your family, you didn't come from a Yiddish speaking.
Oh no, my grandparents spoke Yiddish. But yeah, that's so much of this project is what was lost and reclaiming it. So for me, it feels, you know, very sacred and very inspiring as an artist to learn Yiddish, which was my grandparents' and great-grandparents' native tongue. But, you know, assimilation, they sort of dropped it and lost it. Yeah, Rabbi.
So I'm really interested in this tension that you raised, between this kind of reclaiming of one's genuine culture that was potentially, a lot of which was murdered, and this concern with authenticity, kitchification. It seems like you're really working in the tension between those things.
Yeah, definitely. And even, you know, presenting this work in Poland, it's like I have to be hyper aware of like, we're bringing these characters out into the streets. There's a lot of misconceptions. There's also a lot of nostalgia for Yiddish culture there. Like there's a whole tourism in the Jewish district of Krakow for Yiddish culture where non-Jewish musicians are playing klezmer to kind of bring you into a restaurant. So we're seeing ourselves as disrupting it. There's going to be a strangeness to our presentation. There isn't it's not the kind of cutified version of Yiddish culture. And we're curious how that will land.
I'm sort of interested in like what it means for you specifically to embody some of the figures. I mean, that's very much this question of nostalgia, I think, in character. It can get very complicated.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the potential of kind of your embodiment in the way that that's kind of raising the question of making these figures do something else, I guess. Still working it out.
Yeah, as I am myself, but it's also very liberating. I see Zach's hand.
So it was really interesting because you were talking about I guess you just used the word liberating, so I'll say the sense of liberation that playing out these characters has, not just as playing out these characters, but also playing them in ancestral lands and like connecting in that way and relieving a lot of internal anti-Semitism. But my question is, do you have a sort of an outline or feeling that you would want people in Poland to feel from your performance, as well as how would you want people in America, Jews in America, to feel if they get a chance to see your performance?
Oh, that's a very big question. An artist, I can't predetermine how someone feels, of course. I very much am interested in, during my time in Poland this year, to work in collaboration with local Polish non-Jewish communities and really see what emerges. Even from my time there last summer, I felt a real calling and invitation to have these conversations and to stage these performances. There was an openness that, to be quite honest, I feel more in Poland than here. We're here, I don't know, maybe it's just the Hereness, it's out of context, or maybe I'm still carrying too much shame in how I present this project. I can't quite say. There feels like I'm really returning in some way. And I feel also like this sense of like a sacred task, like somehow collaborating with my the ghosts of my ancestors or something. So, I have a lot to be determined, but I do have a hope and an intention that through these performances in Poland and Lithuania, hopefully, there will be something I can gather and learn that when I bring it back to the States, there might be some insights that I hadn't understood before, having distance from, the lands where I grew up, where I've also felt as an outsider or displaced or not quite as fully embodied as a Jew as I might be, strangely, or maybe not, in Eastern Europe. Yeah.
I'm curious about the gender of the three characters that you've chosen to embody. So it seems to me that the golem and the dybbuk are both represented or presented as female feminine characters, while the tzadik is male. And I have only seen representation of all three of those characters in Yiddish folklore as all male. So I'm wondering if that was an intentional choice to make two of those characters female and one male, and how you went about that decision.
Yeah, definitely. Great question. Thinking about gender, performance, and all of these characters. And the golem felt very much to be a high femme character when I first started performing her and developed her into the great dominatrix. And then I think it's also coming from a place of like, as a woman wanting access to this culture that, I've been barred from and quite humiliated from in certain contexts with. So kind of claiming that Hasidic drag look was like really exciting. And then I also understand that I'm disguising myself as a man, as the tzadik. Like, why does the tzadik have to be a male figure? Meanwhile, the golem didn't have a voice. But then the moment I put the beard on, I had a voice, and it was, a bit alarming, but I was also like, oh, I'm just gonna embrace this because clearly there's this influence of drag where there's also an exaggeration, but I think somehow, years of listening to older Jewish men speak and teach, just came through very organically, and there's no reason to suppress it. For me, again, it's very liberating to play out that character with a lot of humor and Yiddishkeit. And it's likewise in our performances that we have in Krakow. There's a trans performer, there's a non-binary performer, and I do wonder how we'll be received to a Polish
audience who's used to seeing a kind of gender binary in Yiddish representations. But of course, there's also a history of like queerness in Yiddish culture, and very early on being turned on to like Yiddle Mitten Fiddle, Yiddle with her fiddle, which, like, if you don't know that film, it's just basically like a Molly Picone plays a character who wants to perform with like the klezmerim, and in order to perform, she has to go in disguise as a man. So, of course, like, you're dealing with Jewish patriarchy, so you somehow have to respond to it in creative ways. Yeah.
I was very moved by the visiting the grave sites and clearing off the stones.
Yeah.
Do you see any further projects with that?
Yeah. I mean, it is a very typical trip, like a lot of Ashkenazi Jews do. They go back to the graveyards, and those are the only kind of testaments for like what was. You know, a lot of the synagogues have been destroyed. Although the great synagogue in Tiktin, where my great-grandparents were from, grandfather's family was from, was still there. But that was just an incredible experience, and Tomek is an incredible activist who's really doing the work. He's a local Pole in Białystok, and he's doing the work of preservation. And, you know, that's the main Jewish sites in Poland are these, you know, sites of Jewish death. But the cemeteries, you know, the gravestones are an art in themselves. And the reclaiming of those, whether they were used in construction sites, and then there's just a lot of movement that's being done to return those gravestones to their proper place and to do the kind of preservation work. But there's so many that, like, it turned out the small towns outside of Białystok, where my family was from, you know, a lot of it was destroyed or under trees. Yeah, so I see myself filming there. Yeah, I see a hand back there.
Yeah, I'm really interested in sort of the aspect of lots of Yiddish performance art that comes from the role of like the badhan. Is that something that you are sort of inspired by in your performance art, or is that like something that you're like interested?
Yeah, what? Remind me what that is again. That's the character who.
Like
the jester.
The jester.
Yeah.
I want to know more about that. I've come across it a little, but I haven't found.
The comedian during a wedding.
Right.
The guy who, the badchan is the MC who's telling jokes and.
Yeah, and that's sort of like a modern version of that is like the Borscht Belt kind of comedian.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've never personally come in contact with that character, and I would definitely like to learn more. And there's also like, maybe someone will know Herschel of. Yes, like this character I want to know so much more about, who was like an actual Jewish clown working in different courts, Hasidic courts, and much to uncover, and a lot of it is still being uncovered, those histories. Yeah, one more question, I think.
Can I?
Yeah.
Two words that you used during the performance, I don't know if it was, which of you used them, popped out at me, and one just was imperialism, and it was like, what was that doing there? It seemed like it didn't fit at all.
Do you want to speak to that one?
But
I threw that out there.
Let me just used it. But the other one was oh goodness. Well, you answer that, and I'll tell you in a second. But the other one.
Sure. So. Oh.
I remembered.
Okay.
The other one was you used savage and primitive.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't know if you were referring to like when Chagall paints. And there was I was surprised by that, because the Jews were not savage, and
no one was savage.
Yeah, no one was savage.
No one is savage.
So this is
to this idea. It's like he can't.
I think
the artist came from that family. He's painting them in a primitive way, but he was painting his grandfather. He was a kid with AS too.
Right.
Chagall.
It's a little bit different from Chagall as an example. Do you want to explain that?
Sure. So one of the things that I think Jules and I were interested in trying to tease out comes out of a recent book that was published in 2021 by a literary scholar named Samuel Spinner, and it's called Jewish Primitivism.
Oh, okay.
And what it analyzes is how this history of European Jews representing other Jews as savages. I mean, sometimes, often, even outside of some of the work Spinner discusses, by making references to, the Jews of Eastern Europe have no history. They're, as uncivilized as African tribes is like a thing that comes out of.
Like Kafka literally says something like that. And when I throw out the word imperialism, it's like this similar kind of framing of European colonialists,
So,
right?
what we're trying to think of is how this works.
The Jews were imperialists?
No. It's the idea that there is an aesthetic mode here, this question of representation that is emerging out of a larger dynamic of European colonialism.
So like when Picasso is using African masks in his paintings, it's this certain kind of co-option of another cultural tradition, and he's framing it as a kind of anti-modernist position, like, oh, we've lost something in modernity. And so if I understand what Spinner's doing is sort of looking at Jewish writers and artists who looked at their own culture and kind of, I don't know if it's a nostalgia for the past, but they're sort of looking at different aspects of Jewish culture, like Hasidic culture. They're judging it in a certain way as anti-modern, but also integrating it into their work somehow.
So it's this thing that they start to create this idea of like authentic Jewish life, and it becomes an image of the Jewish past. So for instance, I mean, that's how the image of the shtetl kind of consolidates as this thing that was like purely Jewish.
So are you guys up here being doing that also?
We were kind of meant to play with that idea, because also when I first heard about it, I mean, it sounded very offensive to me. So as the character, I'm sort of saying, are you calling me a primitive? Like, what does that mean? It's such an offensive term. I think the point is really to understand, like, yeah, what does it mean to look at this culture of my ancestors' past and sort of reintegrate it in a contemporary way? I'm not making that judgment of civilized, uncivilized, like that's a horrible binary and violence. But I think like learning of this framing from Dr. Spinner, it is very fascinating to understand that artists of the 20th century were doing something similar as culture became more modernized and less religious. So then they're looking at this past as this other way of imagining a future, a new Jewish identity.
Like some of what we're trying to think of is does that map onto Yiddish culture today that's like trying to do this project of reclamation in efforts to build new Jewish identities? Or is that giving us something else? Is it pushing back on this idea of primitivism? I mean, that's something that we're interested in.
Yeah, it's complicated, and I appreciate you bringing it up because they are powerful words, and they're not words you just want to throw around. You really want to have inquiry around them, and I think we're still in discussion about that, and it's a relatively new idea that's just been proposed in this book that got published last year. Yeah. Should we close? I know we're past time. Thank you so much. And if any of you want to meet out there, I'm happy to talk more. I also have shirts for sale.
They're very comfortable.